Hello, my name is Zachary Junis, and this is my third presentation for EH242 in the spring semester of 2026 for my mythology course. In this presentation, I will be doing a Jungian analysis on the myth of Demeter and Persephone, specifically focusing on when Persephone was abducted by Hades and became his bride. Now, to begin, I believe that Persephone is the dreamer in this analysis, and her psyche is the one that goes through the development throughout the myth. Next, the shadow would be Hades. Hades represents the dark and twisted and obscure parts of the ego that do not want to be represented through Persephone, yet are still there, and Persephone learns to accept throughout the myth. Next would be the animus, which would be Zeus. Now, there's a few reasons why Zeus would be the animus. First, primarily, he's a male character to a female dreamer, so it has to be the animus. Now, next, Zeus's decisions throughout the myth, such as allowing Hades to abduct Persephone or driving Demeter to allow crops to be grown again and coming up with the compromises, these are all parts of the psychological development of Persephone represented through the myth in Jungian analysis. This means that Zeus is driving the masculine aspects of the dreamer's psyche, in this case, Persephone. And the last archetype that I really like to focus on is the self, which I would say would be Demeter. Now, there's a few reasons for this. One is Demeter, by the end of the myth, comes to accept compromise in ways that she did not at the beginning of the myth, and becomes full-blooded, understanding that there are cycles to this world and that things come and go and depressions come and go, but development must remain, and one must come to live with certain actions that have happened and life experiences and issues that have arrived. And she learns to accept these and may not take them in stride, but allows them to occur. And now this psychological development occurs over an extended myth, but I believe that extended myth functionally breaks down into 3 different archetypical episodes where the characters interact in a way that represent the development of Persephone's psyche. So the first episode that I think is crucially important is the original abduction of Persephone by Hades. And I believe this starts the entire story off, because prior to this, Persephone was the daughter of Demeter, and that was kind of the extent of her duties. But she was a positive character, naive, young, representing youth. Well, her abduction and that henceforth marriage to Hades completely dissolves this youth and says you are transitioning into adulthood. And now this part of the psyche is scary, confusing, terrifying. I mean, you're being abducted and forced into marriage, and this part of the psyche is developing, and crucially, I'm being assaulted or attacked and going into a depression. Now, how do I deal with this outcome? Something that, Hades representing this evil that can develop and occur to his psyches by being the shadow, kind of forcing you into this dark corner of the underworld, of depression, of death and fear. And I believe that represents a psychological development, especially going, youth, say, under 12, elementary school era, coming in and you're entering adulthood in, say, the ancient Greek world, and they're entering adulthood in, 12 to 14 range, is about right. And here they have to accept these darker realities that death is rampant and that life is unfair and brutal. And Hades represents these darker aspects of the psyche. Also in this episode, the animus is Zeus. Zeus allows the shadow of Hades to affect the psyche. This overarching character forces these things to happen against her will. And this represents Zeus kind of pulling the youthful, naive Persephone into adulthood. Now, the next episode, what I think is a mix of 2 different segments of the story, which is the house of Kilos and Metarina, as well as Demeter threatening to starve all of humanity. So the reason for this is that While in the house of Kelos and Medarina, Demeter is massively depressed. I mean, as any mother would over the abduction of her child, but as being the representative self and Persephone being the dreamer, she's trying to come to terms with what has happened to her, these darker personality traits that are blossoming during that transition from youth to adulthood, from being a child and now being a citizen of the world. And during this development, it's not peaceful. It's not easy. I mean, if you look at today, we still have these issues that I would assume ancient Greece had the same, where part of these myths come from. And with this, Demeter is depressed, representing the depression that Persephone was going through, fighting against the parts of the ego that never are coming to confront and trying to learn to accept. I mean, during this, Demeter is trying to come to terms with herself and being a mother, and tried to help Medarina's son. Well, it fails because it's the development of, you don't always succeed during that transition from childhood to adulthood. Most of the times, there's plenty of failures along the way. Mistakes are made, and that is a crucial part of that transition. And it's one of those things that is accepted in our society, but as well as ancient society as well. Pardon me. Next, part of that same episode would be the threatening of starving humanity by Demeter. And now this is probably an extreme, but trying to make decisions for yourself in response to these stresses that are coming as Persephone is becoming an adult. Well, the self is saying, well, I'm just going to say no. I'm going to opt out of it, not do it. And well, as Demeter would starve off humanity and Zeus would come and say, well, now there is no world, the same thing happens in Persephone's development as a character, but as well as in reality. You can't say no. Stress is going to come, but you have to learn to accept it and accept these myths and grow from these myths, which I believe the myth is also trying to represent, that growth is possible, that this transition from youth to adulthood is possible. It's difficult, but you have to tackle it head on, and you can't just retreat from the world and say no because, well, in the case of the myth and this analysis, the entire world would starve if Demeter did not allow grain to grow. But as well as, it's unacceptable for us to just say no to the world. And now the third episode I would say is very important with archetypical characters is the reunion of Persephone and Demeter, as well as in the compromise that is solved between Zeus, Hades, Demeter, and Persephone. So the reunion, right, Persephone and Demeter come together, and this is the rejoining of the self and the dreamer, of accepting who they are becoming. One that is not always right 100% of the time, is not always sure 100% of the time, but one that is striving to be better, one that is finding reasonable grounds to tackle issues, one that is conquering their fears, something that needs to occur for one to transition to adulthood, as well as a compromise. This is another reason why Zeus is the archetypical character. He pulls Persephone and Demeter back together by forming this compromise and saying, well, Persephone can spend part of the year with Hades in the underworld, as well as part of the year in Olympus with Demeter. And this compromise represents the psyche saying, not always you're right. There's times you are wrong and times that you struggle and fail, but there's also times that you will succeed and you will fight through, but you just have to keep on going through those rough times, say the times that Demeter and Persephone are separate, for the better times where they come back together. And so I believe that Hades still trying to pull her back to the underworld, or forcing Persephone to accept the pomegranate, which in Greek society was accepting of the marriage and becoming fertile for the bride. This all represents, at the end, the self which Demeter accepts, which is the compromise, which is adulthood, which is struggling to overcome your fears. So, as a recap, the Persephone would represent the dreamer and her psyche of development from transitioning from a youthful child to adulthood and integration into society and dealing with these issues that all adults have to face. Hades represents the ego, the fear, especially of death, of coming to terms with one's own finite time on this planet all has to be dealt with. And the animus would be Zeus, the masculine pole for Persephone towards their masculine parts of their personality, becoming to tackle the issues of her life, to create compromise and to accept the world and kind of take the world as also what you want. And the last is Demeter as the self of Persephone's psyche, becoming one that it's okay to accept compromise. Sometimes you're going to fail, but if you keep on going through the dark times, the positive times will come at the end when you're reconciled with yourself. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to have a great rest of the semester. Have a great night.